Well, 1965 was a great year.
Yeah.
After we won the championship in 1961, I was proud of it, uh, having won a championship in NASCAR, even though it was in the early stages of NASCAR. But I wasn't happy. I only won one race, and I vowed that I would win it again and would have something to be very proud of. And so I had gone back with Ford Motor Company in '63, and in '64 we won 15 races, but finished second in the point standings.
Wow.
We had some engine problems, but anyway, in '65 we worked hard during the winter preparing the cars. See, we didn't have the technology back then that they had later on.
Right.
It was difficult to drive those cars as hard as they would go from start to finish and expect them to be there at the end of the race, because the technology was just not there. So I drove it as hard as I thought I could and still expect it to be there at the end of the race. And so that's how we prepared the cars well during the winter and kept them prepared all during the summer. And that's how we were able to win as many races and to finish as many races. Driving for Bondi Long, Bondi was the DuPont heir, and so we had the resources behind us for the first time in my life to field good first-class race cars, starting in 1964. That's when I started driving for Bondi Long. And we merged his crew with my crew, and we moved from my hometown of Newton, North Carolina, to Camden, South Carolina, where Bondi's home was and where his shop was. And that turned out to be just a great relationship. And as I say, we had the resources behind us. And making the switch from '64 to '65 in the Ford for the real gearheads out there, the '64 Ford still had the leaf springs on the rear. They had coil springs in the front, but they had leaf springs on the rear. And we had worked that out to perfection, especially for short tracks or dirt tracks. And then Ford came with the coils in the rear of the car in 1965. So that was a challenge for us, maybe not as much of a challenge for our team as it was for some of the other Ford teams who had been running Fords all along.
Right.
I did run the Chevrolets in '61 and '62, and they had 4 coil springs. And so we had some experience at that, which really helped us to adapt to the coil springs of Ford. Ford had, in my opinion, a better undercarriage on the car, and their concept of using the 4 springs was different than it was in a Chevrolet, but the experience that we had gained in '61 and '62 certainly helped us, and so to accomplish what we did in '65 and making the changes to a coil spring car made it all the better for us. We ran 54 races that year. 2 out of every 3 races we finished in the top 3 positions, and so that's a real testament to the 1965 Ford and also to the crew that was building the car and keeping them up. And I guess I get a little bit of credit for driving it and not crashing out and tearing the car and just using the car up. And so that was just a tremendous year for us. Yeah, we were going to try to repeat as the champion, and we're in good shape to do it. And Richard Petty and I were testing tires at Darlington in April of 1966. I was leading the point standings at that time. We were testing tires for Goodyear, and the only communication you had at Darlington Raceway, unless you went to the main office with the outside world, was a payphone down at the end of the garage area. And everybody, when you go there for a race, everybody would use that one payphone that was there. When they could get to it, they'd stand in line to that payphone. And anyway, Ford Motor Company called me on that payphone. And this was on a Wednesday. And I knew that they had been in strong discussions with NASCAR about getting a double overhead cam engine approved to compete with the Hemi engine that Chrysler had. And I didn't know that it had come to the point that they was going to take their toys and go home, but they did. And we were already entered in a race at Columbia, South Carolina on Thursday night. And the rules back then were that you had to let a promoter know by telegram at least 24 hours in advance if you were going to withdraw. And so Ford had called me about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and so it was getting close to that 24 hours. And so I had to send a telegram over there and withdraw from that race at Columbia. And so they were just going to sit out for a while till they could convince NASCAR that how bad they needed them and could pass the rules according to their desires, but that didn't work out for them. I thought, well, maybe it's time that I always vowed that however far up the ladder I got, I'd quit while I was there. I would never go down the other side, because people have a tendency to remember you for the last thing you did. Yeah. And I didn't want them to remember me as a has-been. I wanted to spend more time with my family. Right. My kids were growing up. My oldest son, Glenn, was 15. Dale was 9. Our daughter was 6. And we just were missing out on a lot of things that they had going on in their life that I wanted to be a part of. And I couldn't do that, being gone every week driving race cars, and because we were running sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, and it just was not. It was a tough life to raise a family in. But anyway, I made the decision then that I would just retire at the end of the year, and so I just picked up some rides the rest of the year to try to collect my champions money. Well, everybody remembers the 1993 Daytona 500 more than anything else. As we've traveled around over the country since 1993, that race has been mentioned more than all other things put together. Of course, I was working with CBS in the booth, and Dale, my son, was on the track battling Dale Earnhardt right down to the last lap, passed him on the last lap, and won the Daytona 500. The producer, Bob Stenner, had the presence of mind to try to put the pieces together to capture a special human interest story. And he did it the best way I think it could possibly have been done. I still marvel at the way that they put things together. They found my wife, Martha, seated in a van behind pit road, and she purposely had me to park that van where she could only see one spot on the racetrack. She had invitations to VIP suites and all that, but she didn't want to get up there where she could see all the way around the racetrack. She wanted to see her son come by each time. She's listened to it on Motor Racing Network and see her son come by, and that's all the race that she wanted to see. Right. And so that's where she was sitting. So they found her and stationed a camera by her, and the shots that the fans saw of her looked like that they were shooting straight through the windshield at her, but they were not. They were shooting through the side view mirror. She had no idea they were there. Yeah. And of course, if it had been out in front of her, she probably wouldn't have known it was there either, because she's in another world. She's in a trance on that last lap. You can imagine the radio broadcast the way it was going, and she was just in another world. But anyway, then they brought a camera up into the booth, had Dale on the racetrack and me in the booth and her in that van. They went back and forth on that last lap. And see, the producer has the ability to talk to each individual announcer. He can push a button and talk. That day, Ken Squire was the anchor person, and the late Neil Bonnet was the other analyst in the booth. And so, unknowing to me, he had told them on their headset, okay, if Dale Jarrett takes the lead on the last lap, said, we're going to let Ned call the last lap. Well, I didn't know that, you see. Now, he had another button that he could push and talk to all of us at the same time, but he hadn't used that button. And excepting when he came on and someone said, okay, Ned said, call your son home and be a daddy. And so that's when I went from being supposedly a professional announcer to being a dad. To add to that story a little bit, that made it even more special. I didn't get to see Earnhardt after the race that day. And the next week, we were racing at Rockingham, North Carolina. And I saw him headed towards the driver's meeting, and he was on the outside of the fence, and I was on the inside. And I ran over to him. I said, Dale, I need to talk to you a little bit. And he said, congratulations, you guys, on winning that race. I said, man, that was great. I said, yeah, but I said, I feel bad about the way I did it. I said, I was rooting for my son on national television to beat you. And I said, that wasn't fair to you or to your fans. And he let me talk on a little bit, and he just said, wait a minute. He said, and he stuck his finger through that fence into my chest. And he said, don't you ever forget that I'm a daddy too.